Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. We've got a great panel for you today, and we're going to dive into some great research from Tenjin talking about the impact of COVID-19 and how it's affected CPIs, ECPMs in hyper-casual and also idle games, and where we see this all going as things start to recover. I'm Jon, I'm your host for today. I'm VP of Publishing at Boombit, and I'm going to let everyone else introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Carole. I work at Tenjin. So Tenjin is a one-stop shop for analytics and attribution, and we particularly focus on the hyper-casual industry. I'm managing the data science team and also heading the EMEA business.
Hello everyone, I'm Paul West, founder of Fumb Games. I've been in mobile gaming for the last 10 years, from ad network side to agency side to now founding my own studio. Fumb Games specializes in making hyper idle games, so it's quite a good fit for this panel.
And hi guys, hi all. I'm Pawel Pawlak. Currently, I'm working as a director of user acquisition at AdColony. Prior to AdColony, I was working for years as a UA manager across a few mobile gaming studios.
Great, thanks everyone. So I'm going to hand over to Carole now, who's going to walk us through some of the Tenjin research on the trends that they've seen during COVID.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jon. So effectively, we decided to pick two countries, China and the US. China, because it was the first country to go into lockdown in January this year. And it's an important country for the hyper-casual, and also US as the top country for hyper-casual, and also one of the latest countries to go into lockdown. So we thought it would be an interesting comparison. My first slide is showing install and ad revenue, and for China, and all the slides will only be for iOS. And as you can see, these two metrics are following each other, so that makes sense. And what was quite specific with China is that the lockdown happened right during and after Chinese New Year. So you see around the 20th of January that Chinese New Year starts. So you see an increase of install, ad revenue, and normally for around 2 or 3 weeks, you will keep this increase, and then there should be a back to normal situation. And what's happening here with the lockdown is that the back to normal situation did not happen. Install and ad revenue stay quite high and just slowly are decreasing up until end of April. The level of ad revenue and install stay much higher than what it used to be before. Another thing that is quite noticeable is that before the Chinese New Year, the seasonality of the weekend was very noticeable, but since the lockdown and up until end of April, the weekend basically completely disappeared. So we looked at the same timeline for the US, so that includes the holiday season that you can notice around end of December. And similarly to China, at the lockdown that happened in the US around mid-March, the seasonality of weekends start to disappear, like while between Christmas and March, you can see the spike every weekend. This kind of stopped happening. However, in the US, the increase in install and ad revenue was not as pronounced as it was for the holiday season. And quite quickly, after 2 to 3 weeks, you can see that there's a little bit of a back to seasonality, even though the weekends are not as much of an increase as it used to be. You can still see that there's a pattern of seasonality coming back. Then we decided to look at CPI, and this time we have both countries on one slide. So the blue line is the US, and you can see that CPI is much higher in the US, but in China, already before the start of Chinese New Year, CPI starts slowly decreasing and kept slowly, but very slowly decreasing during the lockdown up until end of April. In the US, right at the start of the lockdown, you can see some drop of CPI, but CPI now is kind of picking up, and we don't see a strong impact, except again, the seasonality of the weekend where the CPI is not getting as crazy as it used to be on Saturday, Sunday. The next metric we looked at is ECPM, and I think that's one of the very interesting one, because China used to be a very big market for hyper-casual because their ECPM is so much higher than in the US. And during Chinese New Year, this ECPM stay high, but right after when more or less Chinese New Year should have stopped and the lockdown was continuing, that's when you start seeing a decrease of ECPM. And since February, like the ECPM of China kept declining, so that now it's almost comparable to the ECPM of US. While in the US, when the lockdown happened, only the seasonality of the ECPM disappeared, but otherwise, ECPM stayed pretty stable. The last metric we decided to look at was the D7 retention. And that's actually one of the most interesting because it's the most impacted metrics. For both countries, China and the US, you can see that retention was very seasonal before the lockdown. Like there was a very high retention for the Saturdays. And as soon as lockdown happened, retention dropped, generally speaking, but also the seasonality of the weekend completely disappeared. So is it because people suddenly have so much more time that they just explore more game and play the game much less? That could be an explanation, but what it seems is that retention are not gonna go back to what it used to be. That's it for the analysis.
Thanks, Carole. Those insights are really, really helpful. So what are Tenjin predicting for the rest of the year in terms of CPI retention for hyper-casual games?
I think for retention, unfortunately, things are going to stay as are, that retention is going to stay low just because lockdown just accelerate the trend of more and more competition in the hyper-casual industry. So people are just going to start playing the hyper-casual game even less than what it used to be. For CPI, I think the hyper-casual industry, like any other industry, at some point will see the impact of COVID-19. Like so far, we've been pretty protected. But I would expect that in a few months, CPI will also drop and ECPM might also keep decreasing.
And things. It's interesting times in hyper-casual right now, as your research shows. There's a massive challenge around day 7 retention. More games being published than ever before, but games are disappearing from the charts kind of just as quickly as they arrive. So, have you got any tips for developers, publishers that are looking to cut through all of the competition in hyper-casual games?
Yeah, the tips is that certain publishers already started implementing this. Looking at your retention might not be as important as it used to be a year ago, and that your testing should fully focus on CPI and testing with ads so that very quickly publishers can see how much LTV they can make. And if a combination of CPI LTV would make your game worth publishing regardless of their retention.
Cool. That's really interesting feedback, because I feel that at the moment there is this real obsession with just a certain process across sort of all of hyper-casual, and I feel that it needs to adapt with the way that hyper-casual gameplay is changing and monetization is changing. Pawel, let's move on to you from the network perspective. Are you seeing any differences in ECPM trends by country region outside of the US and China?
So actually we don't see any significant trend as it comes ECPM in US as well as other markets. We notice actually only one day very high peak, like it was around 23rd of March, but this ECPM peak went along with installs and impression peak, right? What's interesting, on the other hand, what's interesting we see is the new install trend, let's say. So basically we do not observe back to normal situation with the installs, meaning that we are not able, even like Carole mentioned, we as well are not able to distinguish weekday and weekend after the peak, right? So we see on average the same number of installs every day, actually, whether it's a weekday or a day at the weekend, and this trend actually continues.
And obviously at AdColony, you're powering like a range of games, not just, hyper casual, idle, merge, mid-core, RPG. Are you seeing similar patterns in other game genres as you've just explained in hyper casual?
Yeah, we see that because of the recent stay-at-home orders, right, during the pandemic, those orders have caused big boost in mobile usage. We also as an AdColony provide support in the mobile marketing area also for like big brands, right? Not only gaming. And we see that across the globe, people are spending more time on their smartphones, and specifically on mobile games. And when we analyze the reasons for this demand for mobile games, actually, we saw that they take away people from everyday thoughts, let's say, with short session times, right? And as we all know, like, short session times is one of the, let's say, cores of the hyper casual games, right? So we see actually a big growth in this genre as well. But maybe, let's say, to be more specific, we see the biggest uplift, like from 12 to even over 20% in downloads in genres like word, board, card, casuals, and hyper casuals. And these genres have similar big uplift. But also, as it comes to, like, other genres, we also see an uplift, but it's around, like, from 2 to 4% in genres like casino, like trivia, like family, sports, and puzzle. And but yeah, like, long story short, we see significant uplift in all mobile genres, but the biggest one is in the casual genre and hyper casual.
Oh yeah, I think that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I mean,
sure.
I'm hearing that a lot, particularly about puzzle, and I'm wondering if an impact of that on hyper casual is players' desire now for visually and technically more complex games, and I think you're starting to see that creep into some of the hyper casual games. Paul, let's move on to you and get the developer perspective. So, to me, some of the research that Carole presented, it looks a little bit like the US stock market recovery, and things seem to be back to a normal level. What are you seeing in terms of CPIs on iOS? Are they back to pre-COVID levels now?
Yeah, well, no, in short term, not for us. So we might be a unique case, but we definitely see a slight an increase on CPIs since pre-lockdown and during lockdown. So we saw that increase happen. And we especially notice it with prototyping new games as well. So existing titles, our CPIs are higher than they were like February, January time. And now they're still higher than they were. But we've taken quite a different approach to UA during this period than maybe some. So I can talk a little bit about that, actually, if that's interesting.
Yeah, go for it. I know you've had a bit of a novel approach.
Yeah, so typically we do everything that nobody else does. But what we did with user acquisition during this time is we wanted to test what the impacts would be on organics if we switched off UA or drastically reduced it. And we actually saw very consistent DAU despite dropping our UA spend. So as we saw the costs go up of UA, we just diminished the overall spend across our channels. And it actually worked out really well for us for this period, because obviously it's much more profitable to have the same amount of users spending typically the same from what we've seen. So just to give you an idea, Hyper Idle, 30% of revenue is in-app purchase. So 70% is ad revenue for us. We did see a dip in CPM the last kind of mid-March, April time, around about 20% in the US we actually saw. So quite a significant drop on CPM. But we are back up to normal places now with where they are. Actually, slightly higher in terms of the CPM for us in the US than where it was before lockdown began. So it's been a really interesting period for us. And I think it's actually been quite a bolster to the hyper casual, hyper idle space. It seems like a lot of new players has entered the market organically. That's how we interpret it, which as a game developer, I'm pretty happy with. Obviously, better circumstances would have been better, but that was kind of a business use case we saw.
Nice. And just a non-CPI ECPM question for anyone watching. Can you define hyper idle?
Yeah, so for us, hyper idle, which is a term I'm coining and trying to get into the market, is it has the mass market appeal of hyper casual, but some more of the sophisticated monetization mechanics of hyper idle. So our logic being huge funnel, and as I said, 30% of that revenue that we typically for hyper casual would all be 100% ad revenue is in-app purchase. So we have kind of more in-depth monetization layers in there to help drive that volume. So scalable and more profitable is the goal of this genre for us. And idle is the perfect mechanic for that.
Okay, well, you heard it here first. Hyper Idle, Fumb Games, keep an eye on them. I think we've been incredibly efficient. That was our goal, because attention spans are pretty short. Everyone's getting bombarded with webinars. I think we've been as concise as possible. So we're gonna wrap it up. There's going to be a link to the full report around COVID and hyper casual from Tenjin, linked to the video we put together today. Everyone's contact details are going to be on there. So if you want to chat to anyone in more detail, feel free to reach out to us. And yeah, for everyone else, stay safe and carry on gaming. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.